an imposter. It should just say this. Welcome, people. So there was so much in my bio that I thought, oh, this is so interesting. Because the part that said something about Phoenix-based, right now, I don't know where I'm based. Long story short, my wife, Talia, and I, and our little dog, Luna, who's hiding back there, have been on an epic journey of our lives. Really long story short, about 2 years ago, the trajectory of my life kind of shifted when I got mysteriously ill. And it was sudden, it was fast, it was hard. I was in and out of the hospital, and everything that I had done prior required a lot of energy, required a lot of go, 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 go. And I couldn't keep up with that anymore. I noticed that my energy just was depleted, and I was getting sicker and sicker. I knew I needed a life change. Spirituality is definitely part of that, and has always been a part of that for me. But I needed a life change, and more than anything, a life balance change. Since then, we've discovered a few things going on with my body, autoimmune stuff, things like that. But what's fascinating is when you have one of those moments when you're faced with your mortality like that, and you have for me, what felt like a very near-death experience, you start asking life's really deep questions. And I've always been a question asker, but I started asking really deep questions. And one of the things I thought of was, am I living the way I want to live? Am I doing what I want to do? And am I living where I want to live? We lived right off of 15th Ave and Camelback, somewhere in Midtown. And I had thought and had always had this sense that for my own life, spirituality has really been deeply tied to nature and the rhythms of nature. As my introduction was announced, I pastored a church for quite a few years. And what was interesting is every time I asked people where they found God, or however you defined a higher power, it was almost always nature. Anybody, it didn't matter what you believed. Most people would say, yes, I can see a sunset and I feel some sort of resonance in my soul. I can go hiking, I can go for a walk outside and feel that resonance. And so my wife and I decided to put our house up for sale. We moved up to Prescott, and I got around a lot of nature, and that became sort of my healer. And now we're on what will be, by the time we're done, maybe 8-month road trip. We've actually been traveling since April. So I'm currently passing through Phoenix, and then we're going to Bisbee next. Have you ever been to Bisbee?
I love it.
Someone loves Bisbee. It's fun. If you've never been, you should go. But needless to say, that's kind of like a gist of where my life has been and where my mind and heart has been, is in this place of I only live once as I know it in this present body. I don't know anything other than that. I know I'm Angie right here, right now, and how do I want to show up in this world? How do I want to live, breathe, move? And these are the questions we start to ask in spirituality, these deep questions. And you'll quickly learn I'm a huge fan of questions. I say this a lot, but I am. I've always been the type that has had one foot in the creative world and one foot in what I would call the spiritual world. So one part of me is always doing design, music, something like that, and the other half is doing spiritual direction, which at its simplest form is just me walking alongside other people and helping guide them along as they're trying to figure out their spiritual path. Because as most of us know, spirituality and religion, there's not just one path. There's so many options for us to explore our interior life. So I've had one foot in one and one foot in the other, and I really started to realize in many ways that they're sort of like seasoned dance partners, that really honestly, creativity and spirituality, they go hand in hand, so much so that like a set of seasoned dance partners, they know each other's bodies almost better than their own. And they move in tandem with one another. So I thought it was fascinating that spirituality is chosen, because I think if you're any type of creative, which we know with CreativeMornings, everyone is creative, that the creative and spiritual process, I think, can work so wonderfully in tandem, and for my own life has. And since I can remember, I've had like a deep affinity for what I would just call the universe, how things work. Like, I've been in awe of the stars. I've been in awe of anything sacred. And I've had an insatiable curiosity and wonder for life's deepest questions. And I'm sure some of you do as well. Otherwise, why would you show up on a Friday morning to hear about spirituality? You'd probably be doing something different. But this, for my own self, this curiosity wasn't always given permission to flourish. I was raised in a really strict Christian household, and what I find funny was later I would be raised in what was honestly classified a Bible-based cult, which, as you could imagine, I'm a real blast at parties. When this subject gets brought up, things get weird really, really quick. Because then people are like, well, what is that like? And yeah, you can come on in. Feel free. As you can imagine, questions about it are asked. Things get really interesting. People kind of want to know, well, what is that like? But one of the things that were really interesting is what identifies usually a cult is there's a certain separatism that happens, and extremists. We weren't allowed to have TVs, skirts above our knees, which for me, skirts in general, I was like, no thank you, but now I have to wear really long ones, no thank you. Relationships outside of our church, it didn't matter whether it was friendships, dating, let alone premarital sex, or gasp your own thoughts. There was a lot of limitations. As you can imagine, this didn't go well for me because I am someone that likes to ask a lot of questions, and I have a lot of thoughts. And when you're put in a container like that, you're not held well. I later learned that would actually probably serve me really well. But in the time being, it was very uncomfortable. And this left me with what I would say like a really complicated relationship with church. But my desire to connect with the sacred or divine or the universe in general was still very much there. It was still very much ablaze in my heart. So it's been said that the soul can live without answers, but it cannot live without meaning. And I think that is so true. I think as creatives, a lot of us are deeply driven by meaning, especially in fueling our work. A lot of times, yes, we might create something that looks pretty or sounds pretty, and it's the aesthetic, but I think there's also a whole other layer behind it, which is deeply about expression and finding meaning and connection. So it's my desire for meaning making and connection that often fuels me forward into this, what feels like an endless pursuit for spirituality, and to also walk alongside others and join them in their pursuit as well. So I'm really curious because I think when we talk about spirituality, sometimes we confuse spirituality and religion, and it can be kind of vague. So in order to talk about it, it might be helpful to define it, but it's like, how do you define something that is so almost language? How do you define spirituality? So I'm the type of person that really loves interaction if you're willing and wanting to participate. I'd love to know how you guys would define, let's start with spirituality. What does that look like to you? How do you define that? Yeah, go for it.
I think it's for me about knowing who you are and being comfortable in that. And just being one whole.
I love that.
In yourself as well as connected to the bigger universe, for lack of a better word.
Okay. So if you didn't hear that, that was really well said. This idea of knowing who you are, you use the word whole, like a wholeness, and connected to yourself and to something bigger. Wonderfully said. Anybody else? Yes.
I would say recognizing that there's another dimension to life than the physical and the tangible, and then seeking to pursue that, and then
Yeah.
your being.
That's absolutely true. Has anyone had that experience where it's like you can't logically explain it away, but there's something you're experiencing? And you're like, yes, this is something else, and I recognize this and I honor that. Yep. Anything else?
I think it's like just a part of us. I feel like if you
I love that.
separate it, then just doesn't align. I think that no matter who you are, even if you are agnostic, even if you are a scientist, I think it's just a part of us.
Yes.
No matter what you believe.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Like that word that was used in the introduction, that spirituality comes from the word breath. You can't separate your breath from who you are. And think about this. When's the last time you actually told yourself to breathe? You don't. And if you do, it's usually in moments of anxiety where you're like, okay, just breathe. Or in deep meditation and you want to be mindful. Otherwise, it's something you do intuitively, instinctively. It's just part of who you are. So when we talk today about spirituality, there's times where I often talk about it as a thing, but it's not a separate thing. And you couldn't be more true in what you're saying. It's actually very much, I think, written into the DNA of who we are. Very much. I think it's, what I would like to focus on today is it's remembering that and a reconnection to that. That you really, we separate ourselves into all kinds of categories, and we separate this as something, especially if we're busy. If you guys are busy folks, it's really easy to almost have this be, I meditated today. I went to church today. I did prayer today. I did a nature hike today. And you check it off your box. But really, it's that slow mindfulness of awareness that you are a living being who is having a spiritual experience. Or, as some would say, you're a spiritual being having a human experience. I don't care which side you look at it. They're two sides of the same coin for me. We're having this experience, and we're also having it together. So, in his book called On Becoming a Person, therapist Carl R. Rogers once wrote, what is most personal is most universal. So I'll say that again. What is most personal is most universal. So what Carl is saying is this idea that even in this room, we are collectively mostly a bunch of strangers. A few of you know each other. A few of us know each other kind of. But collectively, we're a group of people that might not know each other on this deep, intimate level to be talking about spirituality. And yet what Carl is mentioning is that his words convey the idea that we are experiencing or feeling on a very deep personal level, that feeling most of humanity has experienced it and felt it too. So that deeply personal experience of spirituality, those deep questions that you had are also very universal questions. And side note, this is also, in my opinion, what tends to make great art great, is that it speaks to a universal human experience by way of the personal. That is, I think, what makes music, art, any type of expression really powerful, is when you can capture in your work something that speaks to the human narrative by your own personal story. And I think that's what sharing our story does. I think that's what sharing our heart and soul into our work does, is it really acts as a connection, a connecting piece. It's like when, for me personally, when Rage Against the Machine, Killing in the Name, if you've ever heard that song, when it comes on the radio, even though honestly that song's almost 30 years old to the day, which makes me feel old, there's still something about it that is 30 years ago, a different narrative, and the narrative is still, mind you, police brutality. That narrative hasn't changed. The narrative is there, and yet somehow, even if the particulars are different, it's still speaking to a universal feeling of rage. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? The song comes on, and you just feel this feeling. You instantly feel the anger. You feel the rage. You have a sense of like you've been there, you know what this person is talking about, even if you don't actually know the particulars of what they're talking about. It's like End of the Road by Boyz II Men. Does anyone remember that song? Yes, I'm dating myself a little, it's all good. Sam Smith, Stay With Me. Anyone have another song that's like sad, sappy, gets you right in the heart? Any? Iris by Goo Goo Dolls, yes. Does anyone just want to cry? You're like, yeah, I don't even know what he's talking about, and I know what he's talking about. Do you know what I mean?
My Immortal.
My Immortal. Who sings that again? Is that Evanescence?
Yeah, that one.
Yes,
I don't know what she's talking about either, but I'm crying.
Yes. There's songs where you can rattle off the lyrics and you're like, yeah, the particulars of the story don't align with me, but I feel this on a visceral level. It's because that artist, again, is talking about something that is the universal experience by way of the personal. And this is what I find so fascinating about creativity and spirituality, is I think the two do this so well and do it in tandem. They're really like beautiful dance partners. That spirituality gives, our own personal experience gives language to something that we're all like, yes, yes. I think where we end up with snafus is where we get caught up on the particulars. Someone shares their narrative and they say, oh, I was reading the Bible, and instantly someone's tuned out. Oh, I was meditating and doing this, or I was reading the Quran, right? And instantly we just tune out because we get caught up on the particulars rather than the universal, which is I think bleeding over into a lot of things we see in society. But at its core, when you're facing a conversation with someone who's having a spiritual experience that's different than your own, I think there's a moment where we can pause and celebrate the difference, not try to homogenize. Celebrate the difference, learn from that person, but also realize in many ways you're looking at a mirror, that this person is a human made of the same matter, flesh and blood that you are, and asking the same questions you are, seeking the same kind of guidance that you are at the end of the day. So whatever you're creating in the world, as a creative, whatever you're birthing into this world, whatever your work is, whatever your heart's desire is, I, as a side, just want to say, start with your own journey, your own story, your own voice, yours. You don't need to mimic someone. We do that, I think, at first to get our training wheels on creativity. That's normal. And then find your own voice and share that. That is the gift, that's the essence. And the deeper we go into our personal experience, honestly, I think we start uncovering really profound universal truths that often end up being medicine for us more than anything. If anybody here has done any type of deep creative work or deep spiritual work, often the answers you find are really deep and powerful for yourself. And that's potent medicine that heals you, could heal others. So at its core, spirituality, I believe, is a universal experience. How it manifests, again, the particulars, they're all different. Everybody in here has different flavors of hair and different styles and all kinds of things. That's kind of like what spirituality is. But it's a quest for meaning and finding connection with something bigger than yourself. And I don't care how you define that something. We all have different language for it. We can call it God. We can call it source, we can call it love, universe, the divine, nature, your true self, which I'll interject and put a pin in that for a second. There's also this idea that to practice spirituality, you need to believe in God. And I also want to give permission, not that it needs to be given, that you don't have to have a higher power, you don't have to have a belief in God to practice spirituality. And that, I think, needs to be recognized as well, which I know sometimes that can be a head scratcher for some, but spirituality, I do think at its core, is connecting with that deepest part of you. And we all have different language for it. We all put our head around that in different ways. But the key is that it's something, this essence, this thing that's kind of beyond language we can't wrap our head around, and we long to connect to it. We long to remember it, and we long to experience it. Again, this is a very universal experience. And what's fascinating to me is that we long for this connection, and that word connection kept coming up for me a lot, and it kept coming up anytime I talk to people about spirituality. They often say to connect to yourself, or to connect to others, to connect to God, to connect to a higher power. And what's interesting to me is that spirituality and religion, at their best, I'm going to use this language, at their best, they are meant to help us reconnect. That's how they're designed, that's what they're for. They're designed to help us reconnect. What's even more interesting is I'll dive into the word religion real quick, because I think religion and spirituality often get put into two different camps, and one against the other. I think there's different ways to approach each. And some people need a little bit more of an outline that religion can offer. And some people find deep meaning and value and richness in this. And some people find maybe a more spiritual path. But I think at the same time, we are all spiritual beings. Not all of us are religious, but we're all spiritual beings. Does that make sense? And the thing that's fascinating about the word religion is it has the same root word as the English word ligament, which is really interesting when you really parse that back for a little. Think of a ligament in your body. Let's take the Achilles heel or right in your arm. It's strong, powerful, deep, connective tissue. That's what it is at its core. It's connective tissue. It's supposed to offer strength, support, connection, movement, growth, healing. It's supposed to be there. At its best, I really do believe that healthy religion, and I know we're talking about spirituality, but the two get intertwined a lot, and I think we should address it, that at its best, healthy religion is supposed to religament or reconnect or remember us to some greater source, to even if that greater source as you define it is your deepest, truest self. This is how it's supposed to be designed. This is spirituality at its core as well. But religion is a loaded word, would we all agree? And whether you, and for me, it's not, I don't have a dog in the fight here against religion or spirituality, but it can be a loaded word. You mention your belief system, you mention your practice to someone, and it can be like, politics, sex, religion. You mention those at a dinner party, and watch out. And I think it's because, to be honest, religion does have a lot of nuance with it, just like spirituality. And modern institutions in particular kind of have brought it on themselves, if I can be so frank. It's kind of no wonder, but I think that's because I, like some of you, have experienced firsthand some religious trauma. And when you experience that, it's deeply painful. And then you can tend to naturally gravitate towards spirituality as a practice instead of religion. Because, again, spirit, like breath, is something innate in you. You can't just stop. You can't cut that thing off of you because it's a ligament connecting you. And while I don't, like I said, have a dog in this fight, I do believe, though, that both, this also should be said, both are meant to help connect. Both religion and spirituality also have shadow sides. They both do. Religion gets a bad rap. Let me tell you, spirituality also equally has a shadow side. Talk to anybody, and there's also a number of stories of folks that get sucked into certain spiritual groups or movements and also experience trauma. It's there because we are human beings that are doing these things and can make mistakes. So I think that we should maybe level the playing field a little bit in this, that they both, at their best, are meant to reconnect. They're at their worst, they definitely have shadow sides that are harmful, but they're meant to help us connect. So did you know that there's estimated about 4,300 religions in the world? In Christianity alone, and I mention that because our country is largely, overwhelmingly Christian. In Christianity alone, there's 45,000 denominations. If you're not familiar with the word denomination, it's just basically a sect or a version of. So there's 45,000, and I say it's because we can't agree, is why we go, that's a dumb idea, I'm gonna start my own. And then this person goes, no, I'm gonna start my own, and we keep starting our own. But did you know, the reason why I mention this, did you know what the fastest growing faith group is in America? Does anyone have an idea? Say that? Islam? None. Now, none is absolutely the correct answer.
It's Europe too.
Yes, Europe. Yeah, so we're largely seeing this probably in America, Europe, a way of, we're getting disenfranchised by certain religious narratives. And the nuns, as they're joked and called, not N-U-N, like Catholic nun, but N-O-N-E, the nuns are those that find themselves outside of a set of religious beliefs but still have a strong desire to connect. but they're finding themselves on the fringes. And I think this is important because whether through spirituality or religion, or you find yourself as in the none category, which I'm curious if you want, by show of hands, how many of you would say I'm probably more in the none category? Yeah, and then there's a lot of like, there's a lot that are like, I don't know, right? Which I also would probably classify you in the none. You're sort of in the, I'm not 100% sure. And it's because we're still all asking the same questions. You're not ceasing to be a spiritual being. You're just not sure of what category you fit into anymore. And it's really quite basic. I suppose you just start with the category of you're yourself first. And how do you nurture yourself? But we're all asking the questions. Why am I here? How and why was the universe created? What happens after I die? Also, more importantly, how do I live while I'm alive? And what does it all mean? And so we're 7.5 billion people on the planet asking the same universal questions. So speaking of answers, what I kind of want to interject here real quick was I was raised in an environment, as I mentioned, that provided all the answers for me, which for a while feels really nice. I'm not going to lie. It feels really great to have it all figured out. It's kind of stress-free. And there's a moment of just sort of like the universe all makes sense. I have the answers. This is what I believe. This is why I believe what I believe. But then decades later, my own faith started to fall apart because I started asking too many questions. And it's wildly disorienting when that happens in your own life, if that happens in your own life. It's wildly disorienting to know the way the world works and then not know the way the world works and still have lots of questions about the way the world works and no one to answer it for you. But what I want to share is, first of all, that if you're in that space this morning, you're not alone. And I want to at least leave you with that. If you get nothing else from this, that your deeply personal experience is deeply universal and that you're not alone in that. So the questions you're asking, the not being able to fit in the box, where do I go from here? Those are all very, very deeply universal points. But the other thing, if I can offer you, is that I made a marvelous discovery along the way in this journey that through all of this hardship and pain and seeking and searching, the marvelous discovery was that the joy wasn't found in the answers anyway. Not at all. The joy, in my opinion, for my own personal experience, was found in living the questions and living the experiences. Because here, when you find answers, it honestly for me felt like a mirage. I would just get to the point where I think the answers were, I would reach what I thought the answer and just poof, it would disappear. It wasn't really actually tangible. It didn't satiate that desire because I think the desire was longing to be in the here and the now, longing to connect, again, with whatever you call that, God, Spirit, Source, longing to connect here and now. And I was searching for answers that all resided up here inside this brain cavity. But I'm having a physical, spiritual, bodily experience. So it's embracing the curiosity, the wonder, the magic of everyday moments. Spirituality can be found everywhere because, as our friend here said, it's in you, it is you. So it is found everywhere. It can be found on a nature walk, in a synagogue, a mosque, a church, on paint and canvas, in a late night conversation, in meditation or prayer or a good book, but more than anything, it's found in the here and now. It's not other time, other place. It's not something we strive to do. It's something we experience now. So I want to, as I'm closing, I always love open discussion because the reason why is I think I'm only offering one lens, one perspective.